If you've been enjoying R4E, the Reason for Everything podcast, please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all platforms or wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to R4E, the Reason for Everything podcast. Today's guest is Natalie Brunell. Natalie, it's great to meet you and really excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Before we started recording, I'm not quite sure when this will air, but I really thought we were going to have to reschedule because it's been a busy week in the world of Bitcoin. And so maybe I will give this as an opportunity for you to introduce yourself to my audience for those who might not be familiar with you and give you the opportunity to walk through why it was a big week for Bitcoin.
Sure. So, for those of the people watching this who are not following the Bitcoin space, we had a spot Bitcoin ETF approval this week. So, a lot of us in the community just very, very excited. This has been a long time coming. The SEC has rejected all these applications for many years. And finally, they approved 11. So, the trading started on Thursday after that approval. And yeah, it's been a very exciting week. And what I do is I host a podcast focused specifically on Bitcoin education and really what's happening in both the American economy and around the world, because things are changing. And I think that we don't get a good financial literacy education growing up. Even if you go to the best schools, I feel like America does students a disservice by not teaching them how money is actually created and the history of money and how to invest so that they can actually plan for their futures and build wealth. You have to kind of seek out that information on your own or pick specific industries that will teach it to you. So I'm trying to do my part by educating the mass public about what Bitcoin is and how it fits into the greater economic picture.
Super interesting and yeah, very appreciative of what you do for the world from an education perspective. And to that end, you bring up the point about education, and you had a pretty diverse career journey and upbringing. You weren't in the finance space to begin with, if I did my homework correctly. So I'd love to give you the chance to walk us through from maybe. And I know you weren't born in the States, if I did my homework correctly. So I'd love to give you the chance to introduce a little bit more about your background and how you got to where you are today as an educator, as a podcast host, and an industry leader.
Sure. Yeah. It's a winding, unexpected journey. So I was born in Poland, and my family came to the United States when I was 5 years old. Parents dreamt the American dream. They wanted to come here for economic opportunity and social mobility. They grew up under communism. So life was really hard for them growing up because there was just not a lot of economic hope for the future. And they came here in their late 30s, early 40s, worked super, super hard. I mean, I tell the story that I remember my dad would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to like shovel the snow off of his car and head to work. And they both worked sometimes 6, 7 days a week just to make ends meet. And I was instilled with just a strong desire to educate myself and make something of myself. And I felt like the American dream is it represents the fact that you could come from anywhere. You could be someone who's poor, not from this country, and you can achieve your dreams if you work hard and if you're a good person. So I sort of had that planted in the back of my mind as I set off to college. And then while I was in college, great financial crisis hit. My parents lost everything. So just as they had started to be able to afford what would be kind of a modest middle class life, they afforded their first townhouse. They got a mortgage. They lost it pretty much overnight because all of a sudden, when the bubble popped, their house was worth half of what they took the loan out for. So that was really hard to see because it really crushed my parents at a time when they should start to be thinking about retirement, and they had to kind of start over again. And at that time, I entered into the world of journalism because I had always wanted to work in storytelling and media. And I realized when I was starting to interview people as a journalist in local cities around the country, I realized that a lot of people were facing the same issues. They might not have lost everything in the great financial crisis like my family, but they were dealing with this sense of the cost of living rising, the cost of education rising, the American dream feeling more and more out of reach, people getting more and more politically polarized. And so I thought in my head, what the heck is wrong? I mean, this is not the country that represents what my parents dreamt of coming to. And I didn't understand what the problem really was until I learned about Bitcoin. And so I was exposed to Bitcoin for the first time in 2016, 2017, had no financial education in terms of getting like a finance degree or economics. But I was very curious because when I started to read books in the space, they all talked about the history of money and actually how money printing works and the fact that we all trust in the US dollar, but what is it really backed by? Well, it's not backed by anything except the full faith that we have in our government. And so I started to question a lot of things. And going down that journey resulted in me feeling that Bitcoin is probably the best solution that we have for the problems that exist in society because our money is broken. And so I started a podcast as a hobby and it turned into my full-time career. So without getting too far into the weeds and on too many tangents, that's kind of the summary of my background.
No, thanks for the tee up there. And there's plenty of avenues I want to double click on. Maybe to start, so I graduated undergrad in 2019, and it was really interesting for me. I studied finance in undergrad. It was the chartered financial analyst track. So, traditional pure play CFA type of analysis that we learned in school. First side of that is we never really learned about crypto at all. And that was, in the real run up, real ramp up to, when Bitcoin and a lot of the cryptocurrencies started to become more mainstream than they were in years past. And I had one class where we talked about it. It was international finance, and it was when the whole Venezuelan Petra situation was going on, and the teacher was very, keen on walking us through current events. But even with the finance degree, I had one of my classes across all of my credits where we talked about cryptocurrency broadly in the history of money, for that matter. But what was particularly fascinating is I graduate from school in 2019. A year later, the pandemic's happening, and you see, the crazy run up in money printing and cryptocurrency. And seeing this whole all the financial institutions that I've learned about for the last 4 years kind of shift and shake from, the plates below in real time was pretty crazy to see. And nothing in my education had taught me about that. So it was pretty interesting. I think that's probably why people like yourself and people at the platform that you've built have been able to amass such a following in the last couple of years, because it's just not something that even I like to think my education was terrific, and it was, but it wasn't even something that we learned at that matter.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. Coming from an immigrant background, I had to get straight A's and I was a really good student. I was in all the AP classes and gifted and all of that. And I never learned what money printing is. I
Right.
never learned the history of money. I didn't learn when the gold standard ended in 1971 and why. And it's just crazy to think how inflation really impacts our lives, because ever since the pandemic, we hear inflation in the news, and it's referred to in the context of CPI, right? This basket of goods, but that basket is manipulated, and that basket is actually comprised of goods that can be pretty easily produced. And so the cost doesn't change that much. But when you look at the inflation of the actual monetary base, the amount of dollars, the units that are in the system, it just continues to go up. And that money tends to funnel into certain asset classes like real estate, for example, which is why my generation and Gen Z feel like they can't afford a house when one income could afford a really nice house in the 1970s, right? And these boomers, there's these great memes of these boomers who bought a house for like 40K are now selling it for 2.2 million. There's a reason for that. And also, how much money has pooled into equities. And a lot of these stocks are being overvalued compared to what they're earning. But because money has to go somewhere when it's printed, and we go further and further into debt. And meanwhile, it's not showing up in wages, and people feel like they can't catch up. And we're losing the middle class, and we're losing the sense that especially young people feel like they can catch up, like they can acquire assets, like they can ever plan for retirement. And that, I think, it's just a pervasive, not only theft, but just a crime to commit to society, because that starts to affect us in how we interact with each other and how much hope we have in our in the morality that's in society, the incentives that to potentially go down a path of committing crimes because you feel so desperate. And so I think you have to address the problems of money, or you're not going to be able to solve anything in society. And most of us don't even realize that the thing that's most broken is our actual money.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I want to continue down this rabbit hole. But before I get too far ahead of myself, rewinding a second to so you're immigrated to the U.S. Or your parents immigrated and you were born in the U.S. Is that right?
No, I was 5 when we came
You're
here.
five.
My
Okay.
whole family was born in Poland, yeah.
Did you settle where you are now, or were you on the West Coast, or where was home for you guys when you came to the States?
No, so pretty much everyone who's Polish and immigrates to the United States goes to Chicago. So, second largest Polish population outside of Warsaw. So, I grew up in the suburbs outside of Chicago.
Okay, terrific. And then I know you went to Pepperdine for undergrad. I imagine going
Yes.
from cold Chicago, the Windy City, to Malibu was quite a drastic change for you. I don't know why you would ever want to leave Malibu, but what was that? What was that experience like? What was the decision process like for going out west for school?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I really wanted to work in storytelling and media, and I think when I was younger, I didn't know if I wanted to work in television or maybe film, because I always loved documentaries and travel shows and all of that. So I thought, well, if you want to work in media, you've got to go close to Hollywood or Los Angeles. So I pretty much only looked at schools on the West Coast. Looking back, and having worked in news, I feel like it probably may have been better in some capacities for me to go to New York or on the East Coast, but it was what it was. And I had a really great experience, loved my college. It was very small. I studied abroad for 2 years in Italy, and I did study journalism. And then I also studied journalism in grad school and got my master's.
Okay, excellent. And then you went right into the field of journalism. What was that journey like? I mean, very traditional, undergrad, grad school, right into corporate America. What was that transition like for you? And you mentioned it, in 2016 was when you first discovered, decentralization, Bitcoin. What was that inflection point like for you as you're kind of climbing through the corporate ladder or going through the corporate journey and then, thinking about branching off and starting your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting experience because I entered the profession just as it was undergoing a technological change with the digital world. So that was huge because when I was looking at the career, when I was a young girl watching Barbara Walters or all these newscasters that I looked up to, they worked in an era where everyone came home and watched appointment news, right? They didn't have a television in their hands, and they couldn't surf the web or they didn't have social media profiles, or there weren't citizen journalists. So by the time I graduated, everything was changing. YouTube was starting to come out, and all these social media platforms. Facebook was new, and I don't think it was in the space of news yet, but things were moving in that direction. And all of a sudden, the job of a reporter was not just reporting and writing the story, it was also being your own photographer, being your own live operator, being your own editor. You were basically doing 5 jobs in one and getting paid less than what someone was earning a decade before, which was crazy to me. Like, there was actual wage deflation that I witnessed in television because of technology. And so it was tough because you start out, you're making like $30,000 a year. You start in a very tiny market because you have to work your way up to a larger television city. And so I started in Palm Springs and then worked my way up to Sacramento, California, which was the state capital in California. And then I worked my way up to national. I was a correspondent for ABC News for a little bit, and then finished my career in Los Angeles as an investigative reporter. But yeah, very traditional path, and just cut my teeth as a reporter.
The point on investigative journalism is interesting, especially as I think about you transitioning out of that type of experience and journey or experience and role to the journey you're on now. To the point about
Mhm.
wage deflation with technology in the media space, do you think that has led to some of the degradation of the quality of mainstream media that we've been seeing over the last couple of years? I know that a couple of years
Yeah,
ago that sounded buzzwordy
yeah,
and crazy to say, but I think it's pretty unanimously thought to be consensus is that the mainstream media has kind of been, you know,
yeah.
the quality's gone down over the last few years. To your point about probably because of technology.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the only reason. There are so many, but absolutely. I mean, right now you have kids graduating school who can't even pay their student loans. And so, if you want to recruit quality people, but I think that because the networks see it as relatively cheap, right? I mean, you could produce a whole story on just your phone. And in fact, in my last job, I was producing stories that aired in a top 2 news market with just my iPhone. That's
Crazy.
it. I started with these massive cameras, and it whittled down to an iPhone by the last part of my journalism career. And yeah, I mean, it's just I think it's tough because if you know you're not going to make enough to pay rent, you might seek out a different industry. And these networks are now competing with all these different revenue, advertising revenue streams, and independent content creators. And so I think they have to sometimes go down the path of more clickbaity titles. Not all of them, but sometimes, right? We see all these websites that are just kind of either, you know, that they're writing the headline in a way that's not completely accurate, but they know you're going to click it that way, and that will generate the ad revenue for them. So I think that that's a challenge as well. And one thing that really disappointed me too was the politicization and the bias that I saw towards the end of my career in the media at large. I started to feel like some outlets were no longer doing journalism and being neutral, but they were actually almost advocating for big government, or they were lapdogs for government agencies or employees. And I really didn't like that, because I did focus a lot of my journalism career on investigative, specifically focused on rooting out and exposing public corruption. And so anytime I saw journalists that were kind of buddy with government officials, I was like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be doing the very opposite. You're supposed to be holding their feet to the fire, making sure that everything is accountable and following the money and getting the records, as opposed to, getting the big access interview and becoming their best friend. And some reporters were like that. And I definitely did not respect those reporters as much.
If you were graduating from school, this year, last year, what advice or what would you be doing, if you had to start your career, in 2023, 2024?
Well, I mean, I found this incredible passion for economics and for the financial system, and how we can change it, and how we can disrupt it with technology. So I would be focused on learning about Bitcoin and starting what I'm doing now. I honestly somehow weirdly stumbled into my dream job, because I think everyone needs this education, and I'm so grateful that I get to do it, and I get to do it sort of as my own boss, and I think it's a huge responsibility that I'm giving information to the public, and I really need to make sure that I'm verifying my sources and making sure that I'm doing my homework, because I never want to lead people astray, especially with regards to where they're putting their money. That's why I thought that there was so much just a lack of ethics in the whole crypto space, especially during the big bubble of 2021 when all the money printing happened, because a lot of people were kind of leading the sheep to the slaughterhouse in a sense, and they knew that these were pump and dump scams that they benefited from. They enriched themselves, and I could never look at myself in the mirror if I led people down a path like that, because everyone works really hard for their money, and people are just doing their best to try to figure out how not to lose it, right? How to preserve the value and grow it. And I feel like everyone deserves to be able to hold on to the value of what they work so hard for, no matter what industry they work in, whether they're a hairdresser, accountant, an actor, a person that does education online, whatever it is. I mean, we work hard, and we should be able to put our money in a safe place. And so to this day, I warn people about the dangers of crypto and all these different tokens, because there are a lot of bad actors in the space that will benefit by creating the token and sell it to the public, and then run away with the money.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, as always, none of this is financial advice by any stretch of the imagination. But I guess my question for you is, and I think about this a lot in some of these complex topics. What we've been hearing a lot in the news this past week is, grandma's going to be able to own Bitcoin to diversify her portfolio.
Yes.
How would you explain Bitcoin or crypto in general to, someone that graduated from undergrad in the 50s and 60s? How do you explain some of these topics, in layman's to, people that are just getting involved in the space?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I always like to say that I think that I think it's like human nature to be skeptical of a new technology, especially a very disruptive one, right? Like, so I can probably empathize with the people who, when electricity was first spreading, they were like, oh my gosh, this is going to burn every house down, right? Or when cars first came out, they thought that the cars would be so dangerous, and let's stick to the reliable horse and buggies, right? This is a disruptive technology that's truly transformative in the same way that the internet was. The internet, I think, is a good reference point for a lot of us, because we all remember, no matter whether it's, your parents or you, we all have an experience with the early internet. And a lot of people did not realize, they discounted how much it would impact our lives and how business would change, how we would change how we communicate, how news and media would change. A lot of us could not have imagined what, the internet would do to all of our lives and daily routines. And so I start with that because Bitcoin is transforming the way that we transfer value among one another. And what's really, truly special about Bitcoin is it is the first form of money that is truly decentralized. There's no one in control. There is no one that can manipulate it. There's no one that could just inflate it by clicking a button on a screen. And it's truly scarce. There are only going to be 21 million units. So even if there's all this demand in the world and everyone suddenly wants to buy Bitcoin, no one can just print more of it. There's only going to be 21 million. And those properties are really, really important, because today we're seeing that we're in a world where we can trust fewer and fewer things, especially power structures, right? I mean, a lot of people don't have a lot of trust in the government anymore. A lot of people don't have trust in the media anymore. Well, the government is in charge of our money. The government prints our money, and they're just going further and further into debt, not just here, but around the world. And that is the biggest power that you can have of all, is to be able to print the money. So it removes the need to trust anybody, because this is a trustless system. At its core, it's a peer-to-peer network for transferring value, and it's completely scarce. So there isn't going to be a situation where they keep inflating and creating more and more units, and there's going to be 100 trillion Bitcoin someday, the way there could be with dollars. There's only going to be 21 million, and so you're basically getting a scarce plot of land in cyberspace. Like, if you think of digital Manhattan, you get to own a piece of it, and no one can ever take it away from you. No one can confiscate it or seize it. You can transfer it globally, permissionlessly. So it's a really incredible piece of technology. And just because it's new, you should not discount it, because a lot of people did that with the internet, and they were very, very wrong.
That point about a digital plot of land is super interesting. I've never heard that before, and I like to think I'm pretty tuned into the space. For you, outside of, go ahead, please.
Well, I really do like to refer to Bitcoin as digital property, because most people actually store their wealth in their house today, right? But
Right.
you can always build more homes, and think about the house, right? Because we had that example earlier. Your grandparents could have bought a house in the 1970s for like $40,000, and today it's worth 2.5 million without renovations. I mean,
Right.
that house isn't worth that money. It's just the supply of money has grown so much that's essentially where people are storing their wealth. It's a store of value. But property it's so important. I mean, it's critical. It was one of the founding principles of this nation, is strong property rights. And globally, Bitcoin offers property rights to 8 billion people who previously, they can't buy a fraction of a building in Manhattan or a piece of beachfront property for it to accrue in value. They can't buy shares in Apple stock. This really offers the chance for people to save around the world, some of whom have never been able to save once in their entire lives.
So with home ownership and real estate, to your point about you can just build another plot. The devil's advocacy point on the fiat currency side is, hey, if I have my value stored in my home, I can go and buy insurance to take care of me. I think that's a huge concern with a lot of people that have some, or maybe don't necessarily trust crypto or Bitcoin as a whole. How do you, as you're talking about this and using your background as an investigative journalist and doing your diligence, how do you think about storage of coins and Bitcoin specifically, and protecting your assets that are digital now?
Yeah, so this is really, really important, right? Because online, there are risks of hacks when you're talking about trusted third parties. There's counterparty risk. The thing that's so unique about Bitcoin is it is an asset with no issuer, which is what makes it a commodity as opposed to a security. One of the reasons why the SEC says that, yes, these spot Bitcoin ETFs are a go. So you can, for the first time, actually take custody yourself. It is a responsibility, right? And there are ways that you can diffuse the responsibility and create a situation where you have collaborative custody. So let's say like a 2 out of 3 key situation. So you don't have just one key, and if you lose the key, you lose access to your Bitcoin. Think of Bitcoin being sort of a vault or a lock. You can create a scenario where there are 2 or 3 keys that you separate among family members or a trustee or whatever the situation may be in your family. Or you can decide to go sort of the traditional monetary route that we all exist in today, which is trusting a third party, like a bank, like an exchange. You can trust them to hold it. In the case of the spot Bitcoin ETFs, you're not actually owning Bitcoin. The issuers are the ones that have the Bitcoin, and they're going to custody it. And then you're getting essentially a receipt. You're receiving shares of this wrapper that they've created, a security instead of actual Bitcoin. Some people feel more comfortable that way. You know, I think that there's maybe a generational divide. There are probably going to be some people who say, well, now that I can have it in my Fidelity account, it's just a click of a button. I'm going to diversify now and add it to my portfolio. But others who do find that there is growing risk in the traditional system, the risk that, hey, what if someday these banks tell me I can't access my money? I mean, is that impossible? Well, we've seen it in different nations, including in Canada in the last couple of years, where people said, hey, you can't access your funds because we disagree with something you did. There's just growing geopolitical and financial risk in the system. And so for those who want to be more sovereign and take custody themselves, there are lots of tools in order to do it so that you do feel safe and you feel like you've sort of decentralized and removed a ton of the risk so that there's not just one central point of failure. So there are a lot of options, which I think is great with Bitcoin. That's why these spot Bitcoin ETFs I am a fan of, because I think they're a great entry point. They make it easy and accessible. And it's a starting point so that maybe you do learn and you say, hey, you know what? I love this and this has done great for me. Now I want to actually own spot Bitcoin and take custody of it so that I am fully sovereign and I can take this wealth with me wherever I want to go if I absolutely need to. So I don't know if that answers your question, but online safety obviously is always, you have to prioritize it. If you are trusting an exchange or a third party, 2-factor authentication, don't put your passwords in the clouds. All of that is super, super important, but it's the same for any password in any, activity that you do online.
Yeah, it's a great point, and you're obviously super spun up on the space. And like I said, your investigative journalism background, I'm sure, helps in your research here. And to that end, outside of your show, Coin Stories, who do you lean on for expertise in the domain? Who's a thought leader that you really admire and think is great?
There are so many. I've just been so honored to bring some of my mentors and icons really in the space on my show. I would say that the people I've learned the most from are Michael Saylor, who is the executive chairman of MicroStrategy. He was the first CEO of a publicly traded company who put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Saifedean Ammous, who wrote the Bitcoin standard and the fiat standard and is a phenomenal economic just genius in the space. Lynn Alden, who is an investment strategist. She was recently on my show. She's just so thoughtful and looks at the whole macro picture and wasn't into Bitcoin until about 2020 or so, or 2019. And now she's such a powerful voice for the space. Jeff Booth, who wrote The Price of Tomorrow, who also speaks so thoughtfully about inflation and deflation and where we're at in terms of societal changes with technology. So those are probably the people that first come to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some fantastic names on there. And how about on the other end of that? Is there someone that you haven't sat down with or you'd love to have a discussion with to either, challenge their perspectives or pick their brain further?
Oh, there are so many people on my dream guest list. I would love to have Stanley Druckenmiller on. He's purchased Bitcoin in the past, but I don't think he's fully where us Bitcoiners are in terms of how deep we've gone and how much we believe that it could fix some of the big problems, because he identifies all the problems that exist with our debt, with our obligations that we can't pay, and I think it would be great to just talk to him and hear his thoughts about Bitcoin. He's also someone who is really thinking about that next generation and the one after, being a father. So I would love to talk to him. I would love to talk to Larry Fink. He was just on CNBC recently talking about how Bitcoin is an asset class that will protect you given the growing geopolitical risks that exist. I would love to have Elizabeth Warren on and really better understand why the heck she's so against this space when, she serves the people, and she really is, in my opinion, I think based on what I've seen of her, she wants to fight for the underdog and the poor and the middle class to be able to acquire wealth. So why wouldn't she be for the tool that has best exemplified being able to do that over the last decade? So yeah, there are a ton of people on my list. I'd also like to interview Elon Musk, even though sometimes he doesn't really like to talk about Bitcoin.
All good. I'm sure it'll be great guests, and I'm excited to hear you have the opportunity to speak with them. To that end, where do you see Coin Stories going? What are you most excited about in the future of your entrepreneurial journey? Again, very different from how you started out your career, but what are you most looking forward to in the years to come?
I'm excited the show continues to grow. I mean, we've been in a pretty lengthy bear market, but the show just recently hit 1 million listens and views a month. So I'm very excited about that. So I just hope to continue to grow it with really great guests that teach me and the audience something every single week. Very grateful to be doing it. And I'm also going to be spending a chunk of this year refocusing on 101 educational content, because whenever the next bull run hits, I think there's going to be a huge chunk of the population who have been on the sidelines, curious but skeptical, who need that entry point and kind of start out with the fundamentals in an approachable way that's not super techy. And so I want to fill that void. I want to be one of the voices that help onboard people, because we've done so much and we've educated so many people, and yet there are so many millions more that need to be orange pilled.
It makes a ton of sense. I haven't heard orange pilled before, actually. For you personally, outside of your educational journey that you're going on, and stories and interviews you do, what do you like to do outside of Coin Stories? What outside of the screen, what's exciting for you in today's day and age?
Exciting right now is I just got a puppy and she's taken up all my energy. I apologize if you may have heard her. I'm alone here, and so there's only so much I can do with her when I'm at home working, because if I put her in a crate, she cries. She's very little. So she's underneath me right now. But so she's taken up some time, and then I really love to cook. I'm a big lover of food, and I come from a Polish background, but I also lived in Italy. So Polish and Italian food are my jam. And if you have recipes, send them my way.
Excellent. No, I've seen some pictures of your puppy, and super super cute. And
Oh,
I think
thank you.
yeah, I don't think anyone would complain about a dog barking in the background. I feel like after this many years of Zoom calls and Riverside calls, people are used to it, especially after all those funny blooper videos during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, she's a sweetheart. I got her just a couple weeks ago. So she's like 5 pounds, a little mini dachshund. And I'm very excited because I've been wanting a dog for a long time. And it's one of those things where you're like, there's never a right time. You just go out and you just do it. And I'm really glad because she's bringing a lot of joy into my life. But yeah, it's a full-time job. It's preparing me for probably a kid someday.
Good to hear. Good to hear. And then maybe just lastly, for anyone that's in your shoes that might be, kind of scratching their heads in a similar position as you were as you're rounding out your career in corporate America, what advice do you have for someone that's, trying to figure out what their next step is, knowing that, the 9 to 5 corporate job, or, their current experience isn't their end all be all? What advice do you have for them? And yeah, what perspectives could you share?
Yeah, totally. A couple things. Number one, I feel like we all have this voice inside of us that tells us what our dream is. There's something that we're all good at that makes us feel like the time is just flying by, time doesn't exist, and we're doing something that we really love and care about, and we feel like we're learning and growing. I just really urge people to lean into that. So many times, no matter how old we are, no matter what our background is, we allow self limiting beliefs to take over and another voice to come in and say, we can't do this, or we're not good enough, we don't have the qualifications. These are all the barriers. Try to do what you can to push those voices away and just believe in yourself and keep going. Do the things that really do make you feel like time isn't passing, and see how you can be of service to others. Because for me, I feel like I'm on this mission to help people understand Bitcoin, and I'm always challenging myself, like, how do I reach this community? How do I reach these people? How do I reach people that are looking at this and never thought they might be as interested? Because I never thought I would be geeking out on like economic theory, like Austrian economics or finance or super techie things about cryptography. Never in my life. But I got so excited about Bitcoin because I do think it will make the world a better place in so many ways. I think it'll make the world a more fair place, a more accessible place, a place where we can trust one another more because we can exchange value in a way that isn't manipulated and isn't kind of governed by just a small group of people. I see so much hope in it. And so I just urge people, find that one thing for you, lean into it, believe in yourself, learn everything you can. The day is short, but it's also, there's a lot of hours in there that you can fit learning and gaining skills, and take chances. Like I took a huge chance and risked it all, kind of leaving my former job as a journalist, and it really paid off.
Yeah, I mean, I really admire and appreciate your perspective and ethos as to why you're so passionate about Bitcoin and decentralization, and I'm sure many people will resonate with that as well, and really appreciate your time and perspectives, and excited to see Coin Stories grow and your journey ahead.
Thank you so much for having me.